Brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth. Alright, so today's topic is kind of going to be on astral projection and realm journey. At least a very specific phenomenon that many people, including myself, experience or have experienced in the past. When I first started astral projection, I did not get images the way everyone else does. I got energy patterns, colors, flashing lights, sounds, feelings, and sensations, but none of them matched up with what I would consider normal stimuli. And what I mean by normal stimuli is most people, when they project, they experience a hyper-real world or a very real world or even a shadowed world, a world that is a little less physical than this one. In fact, I'd like to believe, and from what I've talked with students and other people, I can definitely confirm through my experiences and theirs that a lot of people are experiencing a kind of a shadowy world when they project, right beyond what you would consider just an imaginary jaunt, but not so real that it has the same impact as cutting a finger here. Although sometimes moments may seem hyper real and they may react and they may even have sensation of touch, it's right on the edge of fog, and that's not bad. In fact, most people, that's what their journey is like unless they can get into very deep states of trance. And for what it's worth, if you're experiencing that and trying to get around that or over that, or trying to find a way to enhance that beyond it, you've got to put a lot more time into the actual getting into trance state. So if you're thinking you're going to get into the trance state in like 5 or 10 minutes and get a hyper real state instead of that shadowy foggy state, it's not going to happen. It's still the same basic projection. You're still getting your astral body there, but most of your senses are still keyed into here. So if you think of it like a set of wires that are plugged into a switchboard of kinds, you're only putting maybe 2 or 3 of the switches over there, 2 or 3 of the data paths over there, while, out of 100 or 200 data paths, most of them are still sitting here. So if getting into the journey state is happening very quickly for you, but you're only getting like a foggy sensation, you need to spend more time on the practice of the journey, on the actual getting from point A to point B. So with that, this state that I would experience, and many others I know would experience in the trance state, of these hyper real colors and these shifting patterns, I didn't add this up and get it right away. In fact, quite honestly, I'm sure I've had this realization in the past, but haven't thought about it since I started doing the Labyrinth or professional mysticism or anything like that, because a lot of times things that we realize we just don't pass on to people. But I think this state may have actually been written about in the Eddas and in the Norse mythology, and it would be the Rainbow Bridge. So what I think many of us are seeing on that, and as I've said in the past, I'll say again, when I first started, I seen vivid colors and felt these patterns of energy, and it felt hyper intense. But to me, a tree was a pattern of energy that I felt was a tree, that I could sense, and other people could see it and say that's a tree, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure, it's a tree. What happens is, as you focus on that rainbow bridge over time, you put a filter on top of it so that you can see what the rainbow represents. So with that, what I'm thinking is that someone back in those early days had these same experiences that I do, and that many others who practice forms of astral projection do, or journey work of any kind, where you come into this rainbow field and it's like a bridge, and the pressure from it is very heavy. It's a very dense energy, and it takes a few minutes to really get acclimated to it so that you can walk and move through this bridge. And that would also be symbolic of building your sensory self on the other side. So if your spiritual body is just raw energy in a pattern, arms and legs and all that, maybe not, we don't know. I tend to believe that the arms and legs come after you start the projection, that normally you're just a consciousness. With that theory, you start by creating the arms and the legs, and then sensation and visualization, this being more than just colors randomly blasting at you, comes after. So then the walk on the rainbow bridge is a kind of guided meditation at that point. As you walk on the bridge, you are pulling on your sensory skills. You are creating solidity out of non-solidity, and you are making this bridge, or this tunnel as it were, lead into the place that you're aiming towards. So what you're dealing with is you're actually aiming those energies as well, so that you can project to one or other realms that have a certain concept to them. What I mean by this is that these realms probably aren't as isolated and distant from each other as we believe, nor are they traversed through footsteps and, journeying on your feet or riding a damn horse. Because I hate to tell you, there is a certain lack of mechanical function in these planes as we understand it. It's why you can fly. It's why you have increased strength or durability. It's why getting killed there doesn't always, or doesn't usually, kill you over here. You can take a gaping chest wound in the planes and have a mild chest issue when you come back. You might take a severe cut to the arm in the planes, or become severely injured on the arm, or even lose it. When you come back, you have muscle problems or aches and pains along that area, or even illness that goes through the body as a result, as your physical body compensates for the energetic body's loss and then rebuilds the energetic body. These places are not as solid as we think, and therefore I think the division between realms is probably not as solid as we think. But it's enough that you can aim and go to one or the other, and since we are very limited perspective beings, we have a real hard time keeping our conscious awareness in more than one place at one time. It's a great thing to train to do. I highly recommend it. One of the best skills that any wizard or sorcerer can learn is how to keep their mind in many places at one time. But since most of us can't, even with years of experience, then what you're dealing with is a situation where it seems very isolated when you're there. From the greater picture of things, it's kind of like being in Baltimore and saying that, Baltimore is so far and so vastly away from Washington, D.C. Yeah, there's a distance. It's not that big of a distance. Realistically, it's pretty easy to travel that distance. And yeah, they're not sitting inside of each other, but there's no great wall between DC and Baltimore yet. Give our current political back and forth arguments that people have and this need to polarize everything, I'm sure eventually we'll get walls everywhere. But for right now, there's no wall between those two cities. As of 2018, at least in September of 2018. But we'll see what happens in the next couple months and years. But, there's no walls that I'm aware of between those two cities. It's fairly easy to get from one to the other. It doesn't take a lot. If you manage to get to one and you didn't live in it, you could probably get to the other, because the means that got you to the one will get you to the other with the same amount of difficulty. So I see the planes more being like that. The barrier between them is not like, oh, there's a great wall, an amazing journey, and thousands of miles. Thousands of feet, maybe, if that. Hundreds of feet, dozens, but dozens of feet aimed in the right direction. So instead of journeying horizontally or vertically, you'd have to journey on the next axis, the planar axis. So that's my view on those planes. But then take that into account with this rainbow bridge idea. What we may be seeing is the innate understanding of the path of getting to these places, and all of those varying colors and shifts of energy and things of that nature could be the component energies that form the bridge that allows you to go to any single point. If that's the case, this is an amazing thing to take into consideration, because that means that thousands of years ago, writing the mythologies, methodology and understanding that we are coming to now, many of us are experiencing now, was the same then. This lends a credence of truth that we don't often find in mystical workings in a way that we can back up through history and through something documented. Let's face it, most of our magical texts are no more than 100 to 200 years old. To have something that is hundreds of years old and legends that are thousands of years old syncing up with experiences that are literally modern experiences that people are writing down. Yeah, this is what happens when I try to project. This is what I experience. This tells us that the methodologies of magic, especially journey work and its applications in magic, are very real, and that it's something that has been noted since the beginning of mankind's understanding of this method, that your ancestors, when they would journey, were running into this, at least some of them. And maybe because they didn't have as many predefined notions and ideas, maybe because they didn't have that way of looking at things that we do now, they ran into it more often. I often think that, all of this media, all of these stories, all of these things that we have bombarding us on a daily basis tends to give us a bias that leans us towards this image-based projection method of, you have a solid road or you float upwards. And amazingly, when people do the travel work, they float upward, but they don't float on a particular path. They just go up and then they hit something maybe a few feet outside of their body. They may leave their house before the projection really takes place. They may enter a light, but it's never like a winding road. I've also found that for most people using imagery-based projection, where you start them out with a kind of guided meditation and then let go, like you're walking down this road and tell me what you see, get some interaction with the person when they're halfway under, that this kind of interaction tends towards a much stronger and more powerful visualization when they make it there. Something clearer, something more defined, but often that definition has to come out of the undefined. So, a dark hallway or a dark path where nothing is defined, that then the definition starts to come forward, is a very important part of getting people into these states. So this rainbow bridge may be the natural method of that. The vast array of colors bombarding and the vast array of senses and sensory input bombarding, then becoming solid, something that you can actually ground yourself on and then walk along, and helps aim you in the direction that you're going. And it really astounds me, because like I said, I'm fairly certain that I had this realization before, but I'm also fairly certain that I've not put it into words for people, that it's something that I haven't really went over enough. And it's very important, because it is one of the few things we can point to then that we can say that at least the idea of it is thousands of years old, and that really lends it a credence that it wouldn't normally have, just as something we're experiencing and people are saying, oh yeah, this is how it works for me, because that means that it's a natural part of the experience, that it's something that's built into this understanding, at least for some people, at least for enough people that we know that it got wrote down in stories in a way that we can comprehend now, that we can make some sense of, and may help us a little bit on our understanding of this method of projection. So that really kind of sums up what I wanted to say. I wanted to draw the comparison between this experience that many people have and the Rainbow Bridge, and the mythology that goes into that, the idea of it connecting realms. I think it's very important that we look to the past for inspiration and for some understanding of what is going on, while not being tied to methods that were steeped in dogma. And sadly, most of our old methods are gone. They've been removed and brutalized by the church and by the different groups that came after our peoples. Let's face it, there's very little of original paganry left, and what's left of it is more historical footnotes and less practice and application of methods. The more you look at it, what we can find really is a little bit closer to shamanism than it is high magic. And the high magic really tends to pull more from modern Christianity and even earlier Christianity in their methodologies, which is fine. We still get some value out of that. We still get a lot of value out of that, in fact. Also, a lot of our ceremonial magic methods come from what was preserved of Egypt and Egyptian culture, because they never really lost. I mean, they lost in the sense that wars were fought and won and lost, but their culture was never completely wiped out in the way that a lot of modern pagan cultures don't really have a connection to their ancestors and their roots. Anything modern Celtic or modern Norse is recreation. It's doing the best we can with what we know, whereas anything modern Egyptian does have a lot of historical records and information that got preserved despite the sweeping conquerors of spirituality that came through and decimated what was there. So with that, anytime we can see something that shows a method that we stumble across in the modern day represented in the ancient times or in the pre-Christian times, that's of some very significant value, I think, in our practices. And I'm hoping that when you do your projection, you consider this. If you're projecting in and you're seeing those wild colors, rather than just throwing your visual filter on or defining a filter within your mind so that you do see things, maybe walk on that rainbow bridge for a bit and see what it's like afterwards. I find that it's a stronger experience if I do it that way and I do the subtle, slow walk rather than force myself into a visual spectrum right away. I find that I also get drawn to more interesting experiences, things that are a little bit more enlightening, things that give me a little bit more that I can work with, and I feel stronger when I come out of it. I don't feel drained from the journey, I feel empowered. That's my hope for you. I hope you get something out of this. That's really the goal with this program, as always, and to help you awaken the night within.